Okay, so we'll be starting off today's show the same way we start off every Tuesday episode of the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast, and that is with our 10 takeaways of the week. So, boys, hit the music. Without further ado, here we go. Takeaway number 1. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense just bullied the Cleveland Browns, especially their offensive line. They just punched them in the mouth again and again and again and again, and they gave them a real beatdown. My point is, what the Steeler defense did to the Browns up front was bordering on obscenity, and if it got any worse, the FCC was going to have to step in. This Cleveland Brown team never had a shot against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we're going to get into it a little bit later, what exactly went wrong and how exactly both teams could use this game going forward in the AFC North. But that's the thing with Cleveland. I think they're a decent team. I think they'll find themselves in the wild card race come season end, just given the fact that the NFL has decided to let 7 teams in the playoffs. But I think you just kind of saw in this game, Pittsburgh is on a different level. Their defense is on a different level, being led by TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick. And yeah, it's super unfortunate what happened to Devin Bush. I do hope he's okay, as he's going to be missing the rest of the season. But with Ben Roethlisberger and Chase Claypool and James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster and James Washington, and once you get Deontay Johnson back healthy with Eric Ebron and Mike Tomlin leading the way, the Steelers have looked really good so far. And I do think out of all of Kansas City's threats in the AFC, I would definitely put the Steelers on the top of the list, just given the fact that they match up really well with the Kansas City Chiefs, and they could be the defense that has the opportunity to shut them down. Takeaway number 2. Derrick Henry is a legitimate MVP candidate, and I think Ryan Tannehill has been a great fit in the Tennessee Titans offense and has engineered, many comeback drives. He had that game-tying drive on Sunday, but he really didn't play great on Sunday. He had 2 giveaways late, but it was Derrick Henry who won the game for the Tennessee Titans. This guy had a 94-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter, and the fact that the Titans went to Derrick Henry in the Wildcat on 3rd and goal from the 5 tells you a lot about what they think of their running back situation and their quarterback situation. And once again, Ryan Tannehill has been pretty good this season. I think he deserves credit. But Derrick Henry is probably a top 2 running back in the league. He may even be number 1. When this guy gets going, he is just unstoppable. And the Tennessee Titans are really good. Mike Vrabel deserves a lot of credit for the way he managed the clock in this game, and we spoke about Tennessee last week on this podcast, that they have a formula, and I really like how they have a specific game plan in order to beat you. They execute it, and they just keep repeating it. And going into the last 2 weeks, I was a little concerned if that game plan was going to be able to work against some of the better teams in the AFC, but they were able to do it against Buffalo. Am I going to want to see what Tennessee has in store come Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Absolutely. But I just wanted to say, I really like the way this Tennessee Titan team is playing, and behind Derrick Henry running the ball and Mike Vrabel coaching, they do deserve a lot of credit for the way this season has gone so far. And when you look at the AFC South, if you're a Tennessee Titan fan, you have to be feeling really good about the way the race in the division has gone so far. Takeaway number 3. Todd Bowles may not be a very good head coach, but he's a heck of a defensive coordinator, because he just ate Aaron Rodgers' soul. And that's really the first time this season Aaron Rodgers just didn't look like himself. He looked hesitant, and it was the case, I think, for the majority of the day on Sunday. I also really like how Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, 2 of the Bucs corners, who for a lot of people were kind of concerns for the Buccaneers going into the season, they made some plays. Carlton Davis was questionable, but ultimately the Bucs' number 1 corner made it out there and was a big-time difference maker, especially when he forced the second Aaron Rodgers interception in the second quarter. And Jamel Dean, too. He had a tough rookie season, and no one is shy about picking on him. but he did hold his own against Chicago 2 Thursdays ago. And after Sunday, he gets to tell his grandkids that he had a pick six of Aaron Rodgers. Super impressive. And when you look at Tampa Bay, Rob Gronkowski finally turned it on and played really well. They were getting it going downfield, 5 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown for Gronk. There are a lot of positives going forward when you look at this game from a Tampa Bay Buccaneers perspective, but you got to be feeling pretty good about the way your defense was able to carry you down the stretch. And that's we're going to get into the Buccaneers a little bit later, but that's really one of the main positives I would have if I was a fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that they were able to win a game solely really on the back of their defense and without Vita Vea against this dynamic and powerful Green Bay Packers offense. That is a very good sign going forward if you are a fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Takeaway number 4. Jared Goff. I think he's a fine quarterback. He just needs to be put in the right position to succeed. And if he's not, the Rams are in trouble. And to be honest, I do think going into the Sunday night football game against the San Francisco 49ers, the Rams were a little bit overvalued just because of the fact that even though everyone was saying, oh yeah, they have 4 wins, they're 4-1, super impressive, and I guess they do deserve some credit for that, but let's not get anything twisted here. They beat 4 teams in the NFC East. The Rams do not have a win this season over a team that is not in the NFC East. And I totally understand. They got robbed in that game against the Buffalo Bills. It was pass interference. They easily could have won that game. But at the same time, they didn't. And they were also down 28-3 in that game, so you could use that argument as well. But I think the 49ers really exposed Jared Goff a little bit and said, okay, if you take his number one resource away, which is the run game, and you get in his face, then he's beatable. And for me, one of the more interesting things to monitor over the next couple weeks of the NFL season is going to be how exactly that NFC West race develops. Because I think we can all agree right now, the Seattle Seahawks do look like the best team in that division. But at the same time, San Francisco back on the board in the win column with a nice win yesterday. You look at the LA Rams, they're 4-2, and up until Sunday night, a lot of people were out here believing in them. And then also you have the Arizona Cardinals, who put on a statement win Monday Night Football over the Dallas Cowboys. So the NFC West is going to be a very interesting division to monitor for me. And once they start playing each other, I think that's really when we're going to start getting a little bit better of an idea for where these teams stand. Takeaway number 5. Maybe every coach that is on a big-time losing streak should just be fired, and then their teams will start winning games. We saw it happen to the Houston Texans last week when they fired Bill O'Brien and then ended up beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I didn't really expect it to happen with Dan Quinn, Raheem Morris, and the Atlanta Falcons going into Minnesota and beating the Vikings. And I guess I'll start it from a Falcon perspective. Solid win. It was good to see Julio Jones finally play well. This is a guy that really hasn't done anything all season. And I'll admit, going into this game, I was a little concerned about Matt Ryan. Because last week against the Carolina Panthers, this guy really just didn't play well at all. And I think that that's the first real sign in this Atlanta Falcon team that it's like, all right, maybe we have to rebuild. But I'll give them credit. They did go into Minnesota and were able to get the win over a pretty talented and a pretty desperate Minnesota Viking team. And I think when you look at other teams like the New York Jets, whose coach Adam Gase is on the hot seat, when you look at some other teams that are really considering firing their coach after the season, maybe Detroit is another one you could put in the mix. Maybe it is firing that coach that gives your team a little bit of a wake-up call. Because when you look at it, Atlanta, they had no signs of life going into this game, and then ultimately they get the job done. You look at the Minnesota Vikings in this game, Mike Zimmer should be embarrassed. We'll get to him in a little bit, but Atlanta wasn't really going into this game, wasn't really put in a great position to win, and Raheem Morris got the job done, and I'll give him a lot of credit for that. Maybe, just maybe, this is the wake-up call the Atlanta Falcons needed, and they could just go like last season when they finished 7-2. and 2 overall. Takeaway number 6. The Chicago Bears defense is back to being one of the best defenses in the league. And if you remember, in 2018, one of the main reasons why I was so high on the Chicago Bears was due to the fact that their defense was good enough to just take over and win games for them. And to be honest, that's something that if you watch them over the last couple weeks, that's occurred. And it may not be as obvious as the 2018 Bears defense, because I think that defense was just doing it, up because of the numbers. You kind of saw, off the top of your eye, they're forcing all these turnovers, they're having pick sixes. But this year, the Bears defense is doing just enough to have this team win as many games as possible. On Sunday against the Carolina Panthers, Nick Foles had a typical Nick Foles performance. Overall, he was pretty decent, and especially when you look at the numbers, you're going to look at them and say, all right, it was fine, nothing spectacular, but he just gets enough done in order for the Bears to win games. And I think when you look at Matt Nagy, that is something he deserves credit for. I think he's really had to dig deep in terms of, okay, how do I find a way for this offense and this team to be successful? And I totally understand that when you look at the Chicago Bears team right now, you're going to see them at 5-1 and compare them to some of the other 5-1 teams across the NFL. I obviously know that you're going to say to yourself, all right, stop it. These guys are fine, but they're really not that good. But the more and more you watch them, the more and more they find just different ways to win. And on Sunday, that was a game against the Carolina Panthers where they easily could have lost and just once again found a way to win. Their schedule does get a little bit tougher. They're going to have to play Green Bay. They're going to have to play Tennessee. So I'm going to be curious to see how they come out in those two games. But I do think Matt Nagy and the Bears deserve a lot of credit for their 5-1 start to the season. Takeaway number 7. Josh Allen may have just been exposed. And if you've been listening to this show, I've been saying it for a while. I really like the way the Buffalo Bills are built around the quarterback position. I really think that adding Stephon Diggs was a great move, and he's one of the more dynamic receivers in the league. I think we were able to see that yesterday. Their offensive line is really good. They have a really good head coach who puts his team in a very good position to succeed. But Buffalo's defense has not been as good as everyone has expected. And if you're a fan of the Buffalo Bills, that is something that going into the season, you didn't really expect it to be the case. The good news, if you're a Bills fan, though, is that for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, how badly your defense was playing was kind of covered up by the fact that your quarterback was playing really well. And I think overall, when you look at it as a whole, Josh Allen has really improved since the start of last season to this season. My only issue is people were acting like Buffalo could be a legitimate AFC contender, and just the way they're built right now, I don't see it. You guys saw Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes on the same football field yesterday, and it wasn't even close. If you put those two guys on the same field in a playoff game, I think we know how that game ends. And ultimately, that's why I kind of thought going in, Buffalo was a bad matchup, or Kansas City, was a bad matchup for Buffalo. And ultimately, I think Andy Reid and company did a really nice job taking advantage of it. But Josh Allen didn't impress me against Tennessee. He didn't impress me against Kansas City. And I think now you have to really ask yourself about the fact, can Josh Allen play a legitimately good defense in the playoffs and win? I think last year he kind of got exposed a little bit in that playoff game against the Houston Texans. He panicked and ultimately everything went wrong. Yesterday he didn't really have the ability to outduel Patrick Mahomes in a game where Kansas City dominated a lot of the time of possession. Really impressive effort by the Kansas City Chiefs. How about the second Monday night game for observation number 8? And that is this. The Dallas Cowboys just stink. And I understand Dak Prescott was hurt. This is the first game with Andy Dalton as their new starting quarterback. But good God, you could not have any worse of an effort by the Dallas Cowboys. And ever since Zeke Elliott was out here fumbling ball after ball after ball, I kind of knew that these guys were going to be in some big trouble. And it's interesting because when you look at the NFC East right now, I don't think the division is completely lost, That's the crazy thing, is that this Dallas Cowboy team could still play. The only issue is that yesterday, Andy Dalton was fine. He threw for like 200 yards. He had as fine of a performance as you could ask from your backup quarterback. My problem is it's not like the Dallas Cowboys are good at anything else on the football field, you know? Their defense still could not stop anyone. Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup kind of had a tough time to get going against this Arizona Cardinal defense, and Tony Pollard was running the ball basically just as much as Ezekiel Elliott. And that's a huge, huge problem if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan. Once again, the fact that you play the Philadelphia Eagles in a couple weeks coming up and you still haven't played them yet, that's a good sign because the NFC East as a division is still in reach. You know, those games head-to-head are obviously going to mean a lot. But at the same time, if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan, no matter how bad your division is, I don't know how you could have watched that game yesterday and after felt somewhat comfortable about the fact that your team just could still win the division because it's so bad. Because right now, the way the Dallas Cowboys played yesterday, I have a tough time imagining that they're going to beat anyone. Observation number 9. Mike Zimmer and the Minnesota Vikings should be absolutely embarrassed of themselves. Because the way they played on Sunday against the Atlanta Falcons, I mean, they didn't even show up. The game wasn't even close. And the fact is that following their loss on Sunday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks, I kind of thought to myself, okay, this is going to be a real opportunity for this Viking team to get going. And unfortunately for them, they just really were not able to do that at all. And when you look at Minnesota, they're talented. You know, I kind of thought going into the season that Kirk Cousins, he finally won his first playoff game last year on the road against the New Orleans Saints, but still, he just wasn't able to do anything in this game. And when you're Minnesota and you lost the way you did last week to Seattle, the fact that you lose another game in just heartbreaking fashion, it's kind of like, where do you go from here? Because Atlanta, that was a team that going into this game really had no signs of life. I understand they fired their coach, but at the same time, that's a game where if you're Minnesota, you're at home, you're coming off just a heartbreaking loss to the Seattle Seahawks. That's a real opportunity for you to get going, gain some confidence, and get the job done. And when you're the Minnesota Vikings, the fact that at home you couldn't beat an 0-5 Atlanta Falcon team who was coaching who was playing in their first game without Dan Quinn as their head coach, that is a huge, huge problem. And maybe Mike Zimmer's job is a little hotter than we think. You know, maybe. I think when you look at Mike Zimmer and his coaching performance so far in Minnesota, there have been moments of good, moments of bad, but just overall, way too much inconsistency. Takeaway number 10, I don't want to hear anyone criticizing Romeo Cornell for going for 2. Because I actually do think it was the right move given the circumstances. When you go for 2, it does create an opportunity for some momentum to shift. So I get that's why at sometimes I don't love the opportunity to, go for 2, especially in that spot. But it's an age of analytics. And when you think about it, it really does make sense. You have Deshaun Watson on the field as your quarterback. Your team just scored to take a touchdown lead over the Tennessee Titans. You're up by 7. If you go for 2 and execute it, your team wins the game. That's it. It's over. And when your team is 1-4, whatever it was, for the Houston Texans, I think you're going to want to take as many opportunities as you can to win as many games as possible. And maybe Romeo Cornell just really did not trust his defense to, go on the field and stop the Tennessee Titans from getting in the end zone. And ultimately, he was right. They couldn't stop Derrick Henry. Tennessee marches right down the field. Ryan Tannehill hits A.J. Brown for the touchdown, and Tennessee ties the game. It ends up going to overtime. The Titans win the coin toss, and we all know what ended up happening from there. But at the same time, I just don't want to hear people criticizing Romeo Cornell because odds are, if he kicks the extra point and puts the Tennessee Titans up by 7, the Titans march right down the field and score. And the game would have went to overtime anyway. So, he goes for it. He misses. and the Tennessee Titans end up tying up the game, and we go to overtime. So ultimately, it was a tough decision for Romeo Cornell, and we'll see what ends up happening with his tenure in Houston. It's going to be one of the more sought-after jobs this offseason, considering the fact that even though the Houston Texans are struggling right now, Bill O'Brien did leave them with Deshaun Watson, a QB that ultimately he didn't even deserve.